Lando and Carlos. Carlando. Landos, if you will. It's lovely to see two F1 teammates get along so well. I don't think it's necessarily unusual for teammates to get along, but in these times, with unprecedented access to the teams via social media, it's lovely to see. They get along like a house on fire, clearly. But now Drive to Survive has dropped, and there's a whole episode essentially dedicated to Carlos moving away from McLaren to Ferrari, and the effect on that on both the team and Lando's attitude towards him. A rivalry seems to have birthed. I've seen a lot of people online suggesting that this rivalry is purely for drama, doesn't exist, just for Drive to Survive. And I'd say that's probably the biggest criticism that's levelled at Drive to Survive, creating drama, creating storylines from fiction where there isn't any. The thing is though, I don't agree with that in the slightest. And so today I want to talk about why I think Carlos and Lando's rivalry runs much deeper than just, oh, friend. I guess first of all, we've got to remind ourselves, what does rivalry actually mean? Just so we're all on the same page. Rivalry, according to dictionary.com, means competition for the same objective or for superiority in the same field. Now, obviously, the objective for all drivers is the same, to win as many races as possible, to win the World Drivers' title and the Constructors. But why is rivalry in Formula One particularly pronounced amongst teammates? So recently you've got Hamilton, Rosberg, you've got Webber, Vettel, you've got Alonso, Hamilton as well. Well, when you have an identical car, the field is level. But that's not the case when you're comparing drivers from different teams. Lewis obviously has way more chance of winning a race than Mick Schumacher does in a Haas, right? The only truly level playing field, and even then it's not completely level all the time necessarily, is amongst teammates. That has to be your task. First and foremost, beat your teammate. But if you look at the field last year, if you ask me, Lando and Carlos were the closest battle amongst teammates throughout the grid. And that alone, I think you could justify to an extent them getting some kind of segment dedicated to that rivalry, because there was only 8 points between them by the end of the year. Lewis was well ahead of Bottas, Max destroyed Alex, Ricciardo consistently beat Ocon, Charles dominated Seb, Perez had a phenomenal year, Stroll was alright, Gasly consistently beat Kvyat, bar a few races at the end. The Alfa, Haas and Williams pairings were pretty close, granted, but did they really have anything to fight for? The McLaren boys secured 2 podiums within 3 races, so Brazil 2019 and then Austria 2020. Carlos also got another podium at Monza in 2020 as well. So they were fighting at the sharp end a lot of the time. They both scored very good points, which managed to get them P3 in the Constructors ahead of a Racing Point car, which was quicker, let's be honest. McLaren did a superb job of extracting the maximum out of both drivers. And on track, they worked really well as teammates. You know, they both sacrificed at times their own races to an extent to support the other driver. And, you know, no driver likes doing that, but they did it because of the team. They worked together very well. No one's denying that. But that relative closeness on track isn't the only thing that contributes to this rivalry. And I think that's something Drive to Survive demonstrated very accurately. I've seen people try and claim that this is DTS creating drama where there isn't any. But if you ask me, I think if anything, way more goes on behind the scenes than we realise. So Carlos's departure to Ferrari was announced right at the start of the season. So McLaren knew they had to kind of take away from him towards the end of the year because he's going to a direct rival. And knowing that is going to, even subconsciously, affect the way McLaren treat him and the way Lando looks at him as well. And then there's Lando himself, you know, second season, he's got his rookie year out the way. He wants to prove a point, and I think you could see that in the way that he operated, conducted himself, and he drove last year. He's there for himself first and foremost, and he wants to be taken seriously, because I do think Lando's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder. Okay, I know he's alluded to this in interviews in the past, that he doesn't feel he's taken as seriously because he is perceived as this like funny guy who's the relatable Twitch streamer. I think he wanted to prove a point last year. And then there's Carlos. He, of course, wants to prove a point himself too, not just to McLaren, less so to McLaren, more so to Ferrari, the team that he's going to in 21. I mean, for Carlos to be beaten by his 21-year-old teammate in his final year at McLaren wouldn't be a good look for him going into the Ferrari team. I think that's why that Monza podium for him was an even bigger deal, because he did it in front of the Tifosi. And again, just like Lando, he's there for himself above all else. They both want world titles one day. When you factor all this context into the situation, frankly, to be honest, I think it's a bit naive to look at their relationship on track and not call it one of the most intense rivalries on the grid at the moment, or at least last year. Yeah, sure, there's loads of, oh, best friends content, we get along great. Yeah, and I don't doubt that they do. But again, all that content is manufactured by the McLaren social media team to promote that, because that's very marketable and that's very good and it's great content that we love to see, right? But But is it the reality of actually what goes on for those two drivers when they're in a race? Of course it's not. And don't forget, media training does exist for a reason. The teams want to make sure they're controlling as much as they can what's coming out the drivers' mouths to protect their brand, to make sure they're not creating any drama, not annoying any sponsors, right? The F1 world would be a very, very different place if all of a sudden no one could lie and everyone just said exactly what they felt. Like basically Kimi Räikkönen does. Now, I've seen some people try and suggest that DTS paints a picture that they hate each other, which I'm sorry, it's just complete bollocks. I've watched it like, no, they don't. They just paint a very real picture of the fact that, yes, they get along like a house on fire. No one's denying that. But does that mean that 100% of the time they're all besties, ooh, woo, love you? No. Lando might be a very chilled out, very, very relatable Twitch streamer, but deep down, he's as fierce a competitor as anyone else on that grid. You have to be to reach and succeed at the upper echelon of motorsport. Then you look at Netflix themselves, they don't have any loyalty to any particular team. They just tell the compelling stories that they see and they get this unprecedented access. F1 drivers are not known for being polite, selfless characters. They're just not. And like the insight we get is much more gritty, much more real. It's not filtered through the team's social media. It captures the frustrations, the anger, the tensions that we don't typically see. I mean, the only time we ever really see any of that is in post-race race interviews when drivers haven't had time to kind of cool off and are still, annoyed about something that's happened on track. Now, of course, is Drive to Survive a highly edited production piece that's there to get people engaged and interested? Of course it is. But do I trust the messaging we get from Drive to Survive more than the messaging we get from, again, team social media? Yes, I do. Don't get me wrong, of course they use sound clips out of context. I mean, there's a bit in Drive to Survive where they use Seb's Mein Gott Musterstein over when him and Charles had that crash at Austria where Charles took out his rear wing. Of course, that's a clip from Brazil 2019, but I mean, Seb probably said something similar. Is it being used to tell a dishonest story? No, he probably said the same, if not worse. To me, Drive to Survive does a phenomenal job of packing what is a very niche, complicated sport in a way that can be accessible to the wider public. And as much as I know some of you out there like to gatekeep the sport, for the survival long term, the support of the masses is an absolute necessity. We're hardcore fans at the end of the day. If you're watching this video, you'll probably bang into your F1, right? But we don't drive revenue like the casuals do. And that's not just Formula One, that's any sport. And do I think there'll be a pretty much identical dynamic between Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris? I do. Will they get on? Of course. Will they do some fun McLaren social media bits? Of course. Will we as fans enjoy the bromance? Of course. But at the heart of it, Lando will be absolutely determined to beat Daniel at every possible opportunity. Will he be more uncompromising than ever to do so? Yes. But will Daniel want to come into this McLaren team and assert his authority around a team that really loves Lando? Of course he will. Do they both want to be top dogs at McLaren, beating the other one week in, week out? Absolutely. They're both very likeable, jovial, fun characters, right? But don't for a second let that you detract from the fact that they're fierce competitors. They're Formula One drivers. They're competing at the top level of their sport. They've both got a winner's mentality. They both want to be at the top. They both won't like losing to each other. But anyway, that's my thoughts on the whole Carlos-Lando debate. I actually think now that they're not teammates, they might actually get along even better than they did already, maybe. Because there's not like that internal rivalry pressure that there would have 100% been in 2020. I'm sorry, I just think it's incredibly naive to not see that. Hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please remember to drop a like on the video, subscribe, notification bell. A lot of you are probably getting these videos and aren't actually subscribed, so make sure you double check to make sure you are. I would appreciate it. My name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.